Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. For this video, because I got a request from my website, someone who's a fan of the website and the YouTube videos, I'm going to do brioche. Now, if you're not familiar with brioche, it's a French bread. You can either make it into small rolls, you can make it into big loaves, you can make it into a ring. Brioche is this heavenly sort of light, because it's heavy on the butter, pastry dough that's used for making rolls and breads. I think brioche is delicious. It's a lot of fun to make because it's kind of messy. Well, you'll see when I get into it. I'm going to be making dinner rolls today. So for those, I want to show you the kind of equipment that I'm going to be working with. Brioche can be made in specific kind of brioche molds, which I have, but you don't need to use them. So let's get into the equipment first. I have these little brioche molds, these little brioche tins. I bought these, I've got a dozen of them. So that's what I'm going to be making today, is a dozen brioche. These make small, like dinner roll size brioche. If you don't have those, you don't need those. I also have a muffin pan. And I've made brioche in my muffin pan more than once. This is easy to do. Everyone's got muffin pans pretty much. These little depressions, these molds here, are a little bit larger than in those brioche molds. I'd probably get 8 to 9, maybe 10 at the most brioche if I was using my muffin tin. And then finally, I never use these for brioche, but I have these little fluted ceramic dishes. And these would make, because these are rather large, I could make a nice size brioche. This would be fun to have, I think, at the table, but I never use these for making brioche, but those are some of the equipment that's available. You can also make brioche in bread pans if you want, or you can make a ring mold and put it in a ring mold, or you can just make a ring and put it on a baking sheet. There's a lot you can do with brioche bread dough. For my ingredients, I'm using 1 packet of active dry yeast. That's about 2 1/4 to 2 1/2 teaspoons of granulated yeast. I have 3 tablespoons of water. You can use milk. And I'm going to warm that up to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 43 degrees centigrade. I'm using 6 ounces, which is about 170 grams of cold butter. You want butter cold from the refrigerator. That'll be obvious in a moment. If you buy those 1 pound packages that have 4 sticks of butter in them, it's about 1 1/2 sticks. Then I have 3 large eggs. As far as what a large egg is, each of mine weigh about 1.9 to 2 ounces, or 55 grams each. That'll give you an idea of what large eggs are in the USA. These have to be at room temperature. Then I have 1 1/2 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, and then 2 cups of sifted flour. I weigh my flour, so this is 9 ounces, or 255 grams of flour. When baking, you have to get the flour exact if you want to get the mixture to come out right. So those are the ingredients that I'm working with. First thing I want to do here is get my yeast proofed. So there's my warm water. I checked that, it's 111 degrees. Get my yeast in there, and my sugar. Yeast loves sugar. Get this stirred up. And then set this aside for a few minutes, and if the yeast is fine, and I know my yeast is because I used this just yesterday, this should get all nice and bubbly and foamy within a few minutes, and that'll be ready to go into making my dough. So there's my yeast. In this next step, I want to knead my cold butter. It needs to be soft enough that I can knead it into my flour and the moisture, flour and a yeast mixture. So what I'm doing here is I have the luxury of this piece of Corian countertop. This was the cutout, or at least most of it, from my sink. And I put this in the refrigerator last night so that this would be cold overnight and easy to work on. That's beneficial like this time of the year because this is now the middle of July. It's warm. My kitchen gets very warm from the studio lights that are shining down on me, so having a cold surface to work on is beneficial. If you don't have the luxury of something like this, you can put ice in a Ziploc bag and then place it on your kitchen counter and let it sit there for a while. And when you're ready to start working, move the ice over to another part of the counter, work in that area. When that area starts to feel like it's getting too warm, you can switch the ice back to the other area, start working in this cold area. I've done that and it works fine. So let me just see, this butter is hard, and that's why I have to knead it. Otherwise, it's too hard to go into my dough. And as you can tell, there's a lot of butter here. Just kind of smear this down into the counter. The reason why I'm working on a cold surface is because I don't want my butter to actually start to melt. It'll get oily, and that'll ruin the texture of my brioche. So I just want this to be soft enough that it's malleable, but not so soft. Like, I wouldn't use this at room temperature because the butter would be too soft and it would be oily. In fact, in this kitchen, it would actually start to melt. My kitchen gets so warm sometimes, especially in the summer. Okay, so there's my butter. And now all I have to do is wash my hands, get cleaned up here a little bit, and then I'll be ready to move on to the next step, which is starting to assemble the mixture for the dough. I'm ready to start mixing my dough here. So there's my flour. How's that for foamy yeast? I knew this was going to be healthy and active. There's my 3 eggs that I've beaten up. By the way, if your eggs aren't at room temperature, just put them in a bowl of warm tap water for a few minutes. They'll warm up. And then finally my salt. Okay. And as I mix this up and then start kneading it, what you're going to see is a really wet, sticky dough. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very messy dough to make, brioche dough. And this is only the beginning. Wait till I start folding in all that butter, or kneading in all that butter. 9 ounces of flour, 6 ounces of butter. What does that tell you as far as proportions? I should have put this bowl on a rubber mat so it wouldn't make so much noise. All right, I'm ready to start making a real mess here. And I'm going to get out my flour duster because I'm going to need it just to keep my fingers from getting too messy. All right, I just want to dust this a little bit. I'm not going to put a lot of flour onto this because I don't want to change my ratio of wet to dry ingredients, but having that flour duster there will help a little bit as far as getting things off my fingers. I'm going to keep one hand here clean and then use a scraper with the other hand. Okay. This is going to be really messy and sticky. You can see already how sticky this is. If you beat this into the counter a little bit, that's making way too much noise. It'll help to get those proteins. There's 2 proteins in flour that join up if you force them together in the kneading process and the slapping process. And those two proteins come together to form the glutens that give bread dough its elasticity. And I can see already this is starting to get stringy. That's those proteins hooking up and giving me my elasticity. I'm going to have to knead this for a while, maybe 5-10 minutes at the most. And as I knead it, it'll help. It'll start getting more and more elastic, and it'll get less sticky. It'll always be sticky, but I want to get it as little sticky as possible if I can at this stage. And again, this is the easy part. Wait till the butter starts going in. I moved my cold board back from the refrigerator back onto the counter, and as you can see, this got pretty decent. It's still a little bit sticky, but compared to how it was, it's workable. Now here's my butter, and I'm going to start working this butter in. Start off with a little bit, maybe a tablespoon or so, and force that in. You can do this in a stand mixer, but I don't think a stand mixer works as well because stand mixer has one dough hook. I got 10 fingers. So I just think working with my hands is a lot more efficient. I'm going to need this scraper in a minute. As you work the butter into it, the other butter will work in more easily. The first butter going in is always the most difficult. I mean, it's fat and you've got water in there. The two don't mix. So it's a little bit of work to get that to go in. I've got all this butter to put in. And again, working on this cold board really helps because it'll keep this from getting too oily in this warm kitchen. If it were winter time, I probably wouldn't need it. But summertime, especially with these studio lights in the kitchen, and you just kind of smear the butter in, and you can see that incorporates in. I'm going to work with a larger chunk of butter now. Seems hard to believe that all this butter is going to go in there, but it does go in. You end up with a very buttery dough, but that's what makes beautifully light and delicious brioche. See how much easier that butter goes in once you start getting butter incorporated into the dough? Put up a big chunk of butter in there. Did I say that it gets messy? But brioche is so delicious. It's so worth all this effort. I actually invited my friend Eric over the last time I made brioche. He's the one who loaned me his video camera until I bought my own. And we had lamb, and the dinner rolls on the table were brioche. He loves breads, so. Okay, half of this. Get that all mixed in. See, works so much better than using a machine, I think. Just get it all smeared in there. It's getting so buttery now. The cold board scrapes a lot more easily. I mean, forget about having dough that you can knead at this point, right? All you can do is smear it around. But look how wonderfully smooth that's looking. Let's get the last of this butter in there. This is the reason why I have my camera's remote control wrapped in plastic, so that I won't get my remote all messed up with all of this stuff. Wonderful mess. But this is delightful to me because I know that this is beautiful brioche coming out. This dough is working just the way I want it to. It's even changing color a little bit. It's slightly whiter now with all that fat in there. Okay. Now I have to get my fingers cleaned up, get my dough scraped up. The next step is this dough has to rise. And with all this butter in it, oops, some more butter there that didn't go in. With all this butter in it, it will still rise. Obviously, you can't use this to shape brioche, right? Because, I mean, it's unworkable. So what you do is you scrape this up and you put it in the bowl and you let it rise in the refrigerator for 4 to 5 hours. That'll really solidify the butter in this and make it so that it's pliable. You can work with it for shaping your individual brioche. And you'll see that when we get to that point. Right now you're thinking, that's awful. That's hard to work with. That's impossible to work with. But it's not, actually. All right. I got a bowl here. I'm going to get this scraped up. And get it in that bowl. Scrape up what I can. This scraper, by the way, I think this is a glue spreader. As I remember, I bought it in a arts and crafts store. I saw it and thought, oh, I can use that as a dough scraper. Okay, so I'm going to cover this bowl with plastic, put it in the refrigerator for a minimum of 4 hours, and then the dough will be rised, it'll have risen, and we'll be ready to start shaping our brioche. My brioche dough has been in the refrigerator now for over 4 hours. You can see it has risen. It rises very slowly because it's cold in the refrigerator, but it does rise. So in 4 hours it did very well. And you remember how wet and gooey and gloopy that was? Now it's all hard and firm. It's still the same mixture, it's just that all that butter has firmed up now. So what I'm going to do in my next step is start shaping this, but I don't want to shape this all at once. So I'm going to separate this up. I'm cutting this into 4 equal pieces, roughly equal pieces. And I'm going to take out one of these and I'm going to work with this first and put this back in the refrigerator to keep it cold, because once this starts to warm up, it'll go right back to that gloopy state again. So there's my first piece. I'll show you what I'm going to do with that. To shape these, there's a quarter of that dough. I'm just going to roll this out into kind of a log shape like so. And then cut this into 3 equal parts. Look at that stretch in there. There's plenty of gluten's work in there. Okay. And the way Julia Child did it is she took a piece of the dough off, maybe a quarter of it like so. And then she made the bottom part of her brioche.
make a hole in the middle, and then she took the smaller piece and she made a little point on the end of it, like a little teardrop, and put that inside of the hole. That works. It makes a nice little brioche. Another way that you can do it, I've seen it done in one of my textbooks, my cooking textbook, my baking textbook, is using this part of your hand like a saw. You kind of just roll the dough back and forth until you separate most of it. It's kind of hanging on by a little thread there, a little string. And then you turn this upright like so, holding the head in your hand, and then you push down with your hand, and then with your fingers kind of push out a little bit to make space, and then push the head down in. And then that goes into the little brioche cup. So those are two different ways of doing that. Do whatever seems to work best for you. I've got a dozen of these now to shape, and then they have to be allowed to rise again for about 45 minutes this time. So there are my 12 brioche. I'm using tins that have a coating on the inside, a non-stick coating. If you have uncoated tins, you may want to lubricate them well, coat them well with butter. I'm going to cover these with plastic and set the timer for 45 minutes. These do not have to now rise in the refrigerator because the shaping is done. Again, the reason to put that dough in the refrigerator was to get it cold and firm so that you could shape it. Now it can rise at room temperature. These will rise for 45 minutes, and then I'll be ready to bake them. My brioche now has been rising for just over 45 minutes. The beeper on my oven just went off to tell me that it has come up to 45 degrees. In the meanwhile, I have mixed an egg with maybe a teaspoon or two of water to make an egg wash. I'm going to lightly cover this brioche. You don't want the egg just running down the side of the brioche and getting between the side of the dough and the side of the tin. It's a lot easier to just turn the little dish around than trying to coat from all sides. Just about done here coating these. I have heated my oven to 400 degrees, if I haven't mentioned that already. And I'm going to be baking these for about 20 to 25 minutes. They don't take very long. They're so small. Okay, these are now ready to go into the oven. That beeping is telling me that my brioche is ready to come out of the oven. Oh, and they look just beautiful. Would you look at that? Nice high rise on them. They're so hot, I don't want to handle them just yet. I mean, they were in a 400 degree oven. So I'm going to let these cool for a little bit, and then we can break one open and see just how beautifully fluffy and light they are inside, and yet just laden with butter. Homemade brioche. And there they are. They're cooled down enough that I'm ready to break one of these open. Yeah, which one? They all look so delicious. Let's take this one. Look at that inside. Nice and light and fluffy. And I know that's rich with butter. Oh, let's see how these taste. By the way, a way that you can eat these, you can just eat these plain because they've got so much butter in them. It's very common to put jelly on them when eating them, jelly or jam. Okay, let's see how these taste. Oh, my mouth is watering already. Okay, let me see how good my brioche tastes here. It just feels so light and delicate in the mouth, and yet taste so buttery. Oh, those are so good. By the way, these freeze well. You can freeze them and then heat them later when you're ready to serve them. Typically, you want to serve them the same day or freeze them right away and then serve them later. Wow. Oh boy, these are so good. Okay, excuse me. I gotta go enjoy my brioche.
For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.